Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 140 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. The word editing gets tossed around a lot in photography these days, and somehow the word editing has come to mean the manipulation of images in post-production. Which I've always called the manipulation of images in post-production, whether it was back in the darkroom days or now in the digital realm of Photoshop, Lightroom, Aperture, whatever it is that you use as a tool to sort through your images and perhaps do some of that post-production manipulation. But for me, editing has always meant the same thing it's always meant, I guess, in the verbal realm. And in fact, I guess, I started out way back when as somebody who thought I was going to be a writer and an English major and way back in college. And so the process of editing for me has always been about the sort of removal of images, the addition and removal of images, and the sequencing of those images. Content and sequence and structure matter for us as photographers. And as we've talked about over the last few episodes of Camera Position, story matters. Trying to identify the story you're trying to tell, even if you only have a simple phrase that identifies that theme, and using the ideas of the story elements and the story spine, those things can help direction, but sequencing images and editing down to a cogent and clear story can help strengthen the work that you're doing. And the process of editing your images is one of the most important elements of helping you to create that structure in your work. And whether you're trying to tell a story in that way that we've been sort of talking about, or whether you want to create a different type of coherence in a body of work, a set of images that hold together in that way that we've talked about so often in Camera Position, the process of editing and sequencing your images becomes of paramount importance. And I keep trying to work on the idea of manipulating the mindset of photographers in today's world, that the edit isn't necessarily the manipulation or the change to the image's tonal values, or adding or subtracting pieces of the image with the clone stamp tool or any of those kinds of things, but rather the edit is the same thing that editing's always been in writing, strengthening the language so that we can get the picture or the sequence or series of pictures that we want to have as our most strong and coherent story. So a couple of ideas about that, and we've certainly become, I know I have become very sort of tied to the process of sorting through images in Lightroom or Aperture, and I sort of bounce back and forth between those two tools. And, many people use Bridge, and I know a few people who still use Photoshop, and God help them. I got to tell you, if you're still using Photoshop and looking at every single image in Photoshop and opening it up, either you're not making a lot of photographs or you're spending a lot of time spinning your wheels. And I still use I don't even remember what the software package was called. It's now called Expression Media 2, and it's gone through about 8 different iterations, from an independent software company to Microsoft, and now owned by another company entirely, but I still use that to sort through my images. One of the problems that all of us have is that we're all pack rats. I don't know any photographer who's not a saver of everything, and we all want to keep those images, whether they're the best images we've ever made or the worst images we've ever made. But I'd like to encourage you to toss out the clunkers. Just get rid of the ones that don't make any sense, because they're just taking up hard drive space for you, or negative filing space if you're shooting film. Get rid of those ones that are just no good as photographs. Toss them out. Get rid of them, remove them from your life. You're never going to use them. Honestly, you really won't. And if you have 8 pictures of the exact same subject that have just some small nuance of difference, find the two that are good and throw out the other six, because I can almost guarantee that you're not going to use those other images for anything else. So that's one piece. And then, the other piece is that when I get down to a really important edit, once I really have figured out the 35 or 40 best pictures that are going to do the job for me, the next thing I do is print out those images. And I actually print them out. I usually print them out on a crummy laser printer that doesn't really look that great, because I'm not editing for final art. I'm not making the final prints that I'm going to use. I just need to look at the images as a body of work, not on a screen. And try as I might, I've tried to read long pieces of literature on screen, and I can do it much better on my iPad than I can on the computer screen. But boy, howdy, is it hard for me to really make final decisions about photographs unless I'm actually looking at printed final images. So printing out those last 40 images, if you had a take of, 200 pictures and you've whittled it down to 50 and then whittled it down again to the 40 that you really like and again to the 30 that you really like, print out those 30 and set them out on a table, pin them up to a board. I often use my dining table for this. Even though I have a fair amount of wall space, I like sort of being able to move the pictures around manually. Very important to me whether I'm producing a printed book through something like Blurb, whether I'm making an ebook using iBooks Author, whether I'm making a movie using Final Cut Pro or iMovie or some other tool. Boy, I really like physically moving those pictures around. And for me, that makes a lot more sense than trying to move those pictures around in software. While those software tools can be very, very helpful, where we've got things like collections or albums, depending on what software package you're using, I really like the idea of having a printed image and physically moving that printed image. Somehow it helps me sequence the images. So we've talked about the edit, about getting rid of the pictures that don't matter, that are telling the story in the same way, that are kind of telling the story over again. But we haven't really talked about sequencing. Sequencing of images, looking for similar shapes, looking for similar colors, looking for images that have the structure of the story that we've been talking about. And even with these, one of the great things about printing out pictures is, especially if you print them out, with an inexpensive printer like a laser printer or something, you can write on them, right on the picture, and say what it is that the element of that story is for that picture. Is it the resolution? Is it the piece in the middle? Is it the establishing shot? Where do these pictures fit into that story spine that we've been talking about, or those elements of the storytelling process? And if it isn't a story you're trying to tell, if you're really just trying to get at the most cohesive, the most coherent body of work that you can get at, begin to look at pictures that accomplish the same kind of thing, whether it's through shape, whether it's through color, whether it's through the combination of elements of the visual sort of realm of what we can do with photographs, whether it's a compositional similarity, whether they're using flattened out kinds of space, picture space, or deep picture space. Begin to look at pictures sequentially and think about them sequentially, because boy, we're sure making a lot of photographs nowadays. I know that my students and I are all making a lot more photographs than we all used to make back in the film days, when a piece of film cost some money and we thought about, making more than 2 or 3 pictures. But now we might make 20 pictures of that same subject. Do we really need all 20? And the answer usually is no. So reducing the set of images to the smallest number you can possibly imagine, trying really hard to get that set of images down to the smallest set, and then working through that smallest set to sequence them in a way that makes the story work. Whether the story is narrative in some way, like we've been talking about, or whether it is simply the strongest body of work you can produce. That doesn't really matter. What really matters is using the images to their best effect. Get out there, make some photographs. Try these ideas of sequencing, of editing, of printing out that final set of pictures, even if you print them on draft mode in your inkjet printer, so you're not using a lot of ink and not taking a lot of time and ganging them up through Aperture or Lightroom or Bridge or somewhere where you're making small images that you can just sort of move around, sequence them, and then have an idea of which order those images are going to be and which ones you can do without in the larger scheme of things. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.